Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21, 1960. His parents were Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. On the surface, his early life seemed quite ordinary. He was their first child. The family lived in a typical suburban home. They moved to Doylestown, Ohio when Jeffrey was still a young boy. His father was a chemist and his mother was a teletype machine instructor. To outsiders, the Dahmers looked like any other family in the neighborhood. They were pursuing the American dream. Life appeared stable and calm during these initial years. His father, Lionel, remembered Jeffrey as a happy and energetic child. He was curious about the world around him. He loved to play outside and explore the woods near their home. Lionel would often take him on walks to collect insects and other small creatures. These early experiences sparked an interest in biology and anatomy. At this young age, there were few signs of the darkness that would later define his life. He was a quiet but seemingly content boy. He did not cause much trouble for his parents or teachers in his earliest years. His development appeared to be progressing normally. However, beneath this calm surface, there were subtle hints of trouble. Jeffrey underwent a double hernia surgery when he was just 4 years old. His parents later wondered if this early medical event had a lasting impact on him. They noticed he became more withdrawn and subdued after the operation. He seemed to lose some of his earlier childhood exuberance. This change was small at first, but it marked the beginning of a slow and steady retreat into himself. The energetic boy was starting to fade, replaced by a more solitary and pensive child who kept his thoughts hidden. The family environment also had its own tensions. Lionel was often busy with his doctoral studies and career, which meant he was not always present at home. Joyce struggled with her own mental health issues, including depression and anxiety. She spent a lot of time in bed, and was often emotionally distant. This created an atmosphere of instability within the household. The lack of consistent emotional support, and the growing distance between his parents likely contributed to Jeffrey's feelings of insecurity and aloneness, even from a very young age. This foundation was not as solid as it appeared. As Jeffrey entered school, his quiet nature became more pronounced. He was not an outgoing child. He found it difficult to make friends with his classmates. While other children played together during recess, Jeffrey often preferred to be alone. He would spend his time observing others from a distance. He did not participate in group activities or sports. Teachers described him as shy and unremarkable. He did not cause disruptions in class, so he often went unnoticed. He was just another quiet face in a classroom full of students blending into the background without drawing any attention. His academic performance was average. He did not excel in his studies, nor did he fail. He simply did what was required of him. His teachers had no major concerns about his schoolwork. However, his lack of social interaction was a growing issue. He seemed to be in his own world, separate from the social dynamics of school life. He did not seem to understand how to connect with his peers. This social awkwardness made him an easy target for teasing, though he rarely reacted. He absorbed the taunts silently, which only pushed him further into his shell of isolation. At home, his interests began to take a strange turn. He developed a fascination with animal bones. He would collect roadkill and dissect the animals in the woods behind his house. He was curious about their internal structures. He wanted to see how they were put together. This hobby was something he kept secret from most people. It was a private world where he felt in control. This was a stark contrast to his school life, where he felt powerless and invisible. His experiments with animal anatomy became a central focus of his solitary time, a secret passion that no one else understood. This growing preoccupation with his strange hobby further separated him from other children his age. While his classmates were interested in music, sports, and dating, Jeffrey was focused on his solitary experiments. He had no one to share his interests with. He felt completely different from everyone around him. This profound sense of being an outsider shaped his teenage years. He believed that no one could ever understand him. This belief deepened his isolation and prevented him from seeking any kind of connection or help from others. He was on a path that was entirely his own. The problems within the Dahmer household worsened during Jeffrey's teenage years. The arguments between his parents, Lionel and Joyce, became more frequent and intense. Their marriage was falling apart. The constant conflict created a tense and unhappy atmosphere at home. Jeffrey would often retreat to his room or the woods to escape the fighting. The house was no longer a place of comfort or security. It was a source of stress and anxiety. He felt caught in the middle of his parents' turmoil. yet he was also completely ignored by them as they focused on their own issues. Lionel and Joyce were so consumed by their marital problems that they paid little attention to their son's behavior. They noticed he was withdrawn, but they attributed it to typical teenage moodiness. They did not see the warning signs of his severe isolation. His father later expressed deep regret for not being more involved in Jeffrey's life during this critical period. He was busy with work and his own personal struggles. Joyce's mental health continued to decline, making her unable to provide the emotional support he needed. Jeffrey was left to navigate his confusing and troubling thoughts all by himself. The family dynamic completely broke down when Joyce took Jeffrey's younger brother David and left the family home in 1978. She moved out of state, leaving Jeffrey behind with his father. Shortly after, Lionel also moved out to live in a motel while the divorce was being finalized. At just 18 years old, Jeffrey was left to live alone in the family house for several months. This period of complete abandonment was devastating for him. He had the freedom to do whatever he wanted without any supervision. This unstructured and lonely existence allowed his darkest impulses to grow without any restraint. During this time alone, his feelings of isolation reached their peak. He had no one to talk to and no one to guide him. The house that was once a family home became his solitary fortress. He was surrounded by the remnants of a broken family. The emptiness of the house mirrored the emptiness he felt inside. This period of intense loneliness was a turning point. It solidified his belief that he was destined to be alone. The lack of any parental presence or guidance during these formative months set the stage for the tragic events that would follow in his adult life. After graduating from high school in 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer's path became even more aimless and isolated. His parents' divorce was finalized, and the family home was sold. He briefly enrolled at Ohio State University, a decision pushed by his father. However, he had no real interest in higher education. He struggled with his classes and felt overwhelmed by the university environment. He did not attend lectures and spent most of his time drinking alone in his dormitory room. His attempt at a conventional life was a complete failure. He dropped out of college after just one semester, deepening his father's disappointment and his own sense of failure. His isolation was now compounded by a growing dependence on alcohol. He started drinking heavily in high school, and it became a crutch to cope with his social anxiety and internal turmoil. Alcohol allowed him to numb his feelings of loneliness and confusion. It became a constant companion. His drinking was a way to escape the reality of his life, a reality he found unbearable. This substance abuse only made his situation worse. It clouded his judgment and further eroded his ability to function in society. He was caught in a destructive cycle of drinking and isolation, with no clear way out. In an effort to provide some structure and discipline, his father convinced him to enlist in the United States Army in 1979. He was trained as a medical specialist and stationed in West Germany. For a brief time, it seemed like a positive step. The military provided a routine and a sense of purpose. However, his underlying problems did not disappear. His alcoholism continued to be a major issue. He was often drunk on duty and unable to perform his responsibilities. The strict environment of the military was ultimately not a cure for his deep-seated psychological issues. He was still the same isolated person, just in a different setting. His military career ended as abruptly as his college one. After just 2 years of service, he was honorably discharged due to his alcoholism. He had proven unable to meet the standards required of a soldier. He returned to the United States with no job, no prospects, and no direction. He moved back to Ohio to live with his grandmother. This return felt like another failure. He was now in his early 20s, but he was more lost and alone than ever before. The world seemed to have no place for him, and he had no idea how to create one for himself. Perfect. Living with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, did little to change Dahmer's destructive patterns. He was quiet and polite around her, but he continued to drink heavily. He struggled to hold down a job. He worked for a time at a local chocolate factory, but his attendance was poor and he was eventually fired. His life lacked any meaningful structure or connection. He spent his days in a fog of alcohol and his nights wrestling with his dark thoughts. The isolation he had felt his entire life was now all-consuming. He felt completely detached from the world and the people around him. During this period, his internal world grew darker. He was plagued by obsessive thoughts and fantasies that he just could not control. These thoughts centered on themes of control and dominance. He craved companionship, but felt incapable of forming healthy relationships. He believed the only way to keep someone with him forever was to have complete power over them. These disturbing fantasies became more and more intense. He struggled to separate them from reality. The line between his inner world and the outside world began to blur, a dangerous development for someone so profoundly isolated. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would frequent bars and public spaces not to socialize, but to find individuals he could project his fantasies onto. His interactions were always shallow and brief. He was unable to form any genuine emotional connection. He saw people as objects for his own gratification, rather than as human beings with their own lives and feelings. This dehumanizing perspective was a key part of his psychological decline. It allowed him to distance himself from the reality of his actions and the harm he was causing. He was lost in a world of his own making. This descent was a gradual process, built upon years of loneliness, family dysfunction, and untreated mental health issues. There was no single event that caused his turn to darkness. Instead, it was a slow erosion of his humanity. His inability to cope with his feelings, his reliance on alcohol, and his disturbing fantasies all combined to create a perfect storm. He was a man adrift, with no anchor to reality or morality. The quiet, shy boy from Ohio had transformed into someone his family and former classmates would never recognize. He was on a path from which there was no return. Jeffrey Dahmer's first significant brush with the law occurred during his time living with his grandmother. His behavior, fueled by alcoholism, became increasingly public and, disorderly. In 1982, he was arrested for indecent exposure at a state fair. He was again arrested for disorderly conduct in 1986. These incidents were clear warning signs that his internal struggles were starting to spill out into the open. However, they were treated as minor offenses. They were seen as the actions of a troubled drunk, not as indicators of a deeper, more severe psychological problem. He received fines and probation, but no meaningful intervention. These early arrests did not serve as a wake-up call for Dahmer. Instead, they seemed to have little impact on his behavior. He was able to present a calm and cooperative demeanor to the authorities, which likely contributed to the lenient treatment he received. He was seen as a nuisance rather than a danger. His grandmother grew increasingly concerned about his drinking and erratic behavior. She eventually asked him to leave her home in 1988 because she could no longer handle his alcoholism and the constant smell of chemicals coming from the basement, where he was continuing his gruesome experiments. After leaving his grandmother's house, Dahmer moved into his own apartment in Milwaukee. This move gave him complete freedom and privacy. He was no longer under any form of supervision. His isolation was now absolute. It was in this apartment that his dark fantasies would be fully realized. Without anyone to monitor his actions, he was free to act on his most destructive impulses. The lack of accountability and the anonymity of city life allowed his behavior to escalate dramatically. His apartment became a private sanctuary for his horrifying activities, hidden away from the view of the outside world. Despite the escalating severity of his internal state, he managed to avoid serious legal trouble for some time. There was a notable incident in 1988 involving a young boy, but charges were handled in a way that did not lead to a long prison sentence. He was convicted of second-degree sexual assault and served only 10 months in a work release program. This sentence has since been heavily criticized. It was another missed opportunity for the justice system to recognize the true extent of his dangerousness. He was released back into the community, free to continue his descent. The end of Jeffrey Dahmer's reign of terror came on July 22, 1991. It was not the result of a long and complex police investigation. It happened by chance. A young man named Tracy Edwards managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment. Edwards flagged down a police car, his wrist still in a handcuff. He told the officers that a weird dude had pulled a knife on him and threatened to kill him. He led the police back to the Oxford Apartments to apartment number 213. The officers were initially just responding to a routine assault complaint. They had no idea what they were about to discover. When the police entered the apartment, they were immediately struck by a foul odor. Dahmer was calm and cooperative at first. He tried to explain away the handcuff as a misunderstanding, but the officers were suspicious. One of the officers, Rolf Muller, opened the refrigerator. Inside, he made a horrifying discovery that confirmed their worst fears. The reality of what had been happening in that small apartment was immediately apparent. The scene was beyond anything they could have imagined. It was a house of horrors hidden in a seemingly normal apartment building. Dahmer was arrested on the spot. He knew there was no escape. As the police began their search of the apartment, the full extent of his crimes was revealed. The evidence they found was overwhelming and deeply disturbing. It painted a picture of a man who had been living a secret life of unimaginable horror. The police investigation uncovered years of hidden atrocities. The quiet, unassuming man who lived in apartment 213 was exposed as one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. The long, dark journey of Jeffrey Dahmer had finally come to an end. The capture of Dahmer sent shockwaves through the city of Milwaukee and beyond. His crimes were so shocking that they were difficult for people to comprehend. The details that emerged during the investigation were the stuff of nightmares. The public was horrified and fascinated by the story of the man who had lived a double life for so long. He had managed to commit his terrible acts for years without being caught. His arrest marked the beginning of a long and painful process of trying to understand how such a thing could have happened. The quiet boy from Ohio was now a household name for all the wrong reasons. The news of Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest and the details of his crimes left the public in a state of profound shock. People struggled to understand how such evil could exist. The story dominated headlines across the country and around the world. The media coverage was intense, with every detail of the case being scrutinized and honestly sensationalized. For the residents of Milwaukee, the horror was personal. The crimes had happened in their city, in their neighborhoods. There was a collective sense of grief, anger, and disbelief. The community felt violated and unsafe. The trust between neighbors was shattered. The trial of Jeffrey Dahmer in 1992 was a major public event. He pleaded guilty, but insane. The trial focused on his mental state at the time of the crimes. His defense team argued that he was driven by uncontrollable urges and was not legally responsible for his actions. The prosecution argued that he was sane and had acted with deliberate cruelty. The testimony was graphic and emotionally draining for everyone involved, especially the families of the victims. The trial forced society to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. It raised difficult questions about sanity, evil, and justice. Ultimately, the jury rejected the insanity defense. They found Dahmer to be legally sane and therefore responsible for his actions. He was convicted of 15 counts of murder and sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison. This meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars with no possibility of parole. The verdict brought a sense of relief to many, but it did not erase the pain and trauma caused by his crimes. The families of the victims were left to mourn their loved ones and try to rebuild their lives in the aftermath of an unimaginable tragedy. The case also sparked a great deal of public debate and self-reflection. People questioned how Dahmer had been able to get away with his crimes for so long. The police department faced criticism for not taking earlier reports more seriously, particularly those from minority communities. The case exposed deep-seated issues of race and class in the justice system. It became a catalyst for discussions about police reform and the need for law enforcement to be more responsive to all citizens. Society was forced to look at its own failings and consider what could be done to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. The life and crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer serve as a chilling reminder of the importance of mental health awareness. His story is a case study in untreated psychological distress. From his lonely childhood to his troubled adolescence, there were numerous signs that he was struggling. He was isolated, anxious, and plagued by disturbing thoughts. Yet these issues were never properly addressed. His family was too preoccupied with their own problems, and the systems in place at the time were not equipped to identify or help a young person in his situation. His story highlights a critical need for early intervention. We must learn to recognize the signs of mental health struggles in young people. Withdrawal, social isolation, substance abuse, and drastic changes in behavior can all be indicators that something is wrong. It is crucial to create an environment where young people feel safe to talk about their feelings without fear of judgment. Schools, families, and communities all have a role to play in fostering this open dialogue. Had Dahmer received psychological help as a child or teenager, his life might have taken a very different path. We cannot know for sure, but the lack of support was certainly a contributing factor to his tragic decline. The case also underscores the importance of a justice system that is prepared to deal with complex mental health issues. Dahmer's early encounters with the law were missed opportunities. His crimes were treated as minor offenses, and the underlying psychological problems were ignored. A more thorough evaluation of his mental state might have revealed the danger he posed. The justice system must work more closely with mental health professionals to ensure that individuals who commit crimes receive the appropriate treatment and supervision. This is not about excusing criminal behavior, but about understanding its root causes and preventing future violence. Ultimately, the Dahmer case is a dark chapter in our history, but it offers valuable lessons. It teaches us about the devastating consequences of isolation and untreated mental illness. It calls on us to be more compassionate and vigilant. We must build a society that supports those who are struggling, a society that does not turn a blind eye to suffering. By promoting mental health awareness, encouraging open conversation, and providing accessible support services, we can help prevent future tragedies. The shadows are always there, but it is our collective responsibility to shine a light on them and offer a hand to those lost in the darkness.